All right, time for the speed read, starting with politics. The big question Tuesday night was whether Democratic Socialists can expand their reach beyond New York City. From the Denver Post, Colorado voters headed to the polls on Tuesday, the next place where Democratic Socialists were on the ballot against the Democratic establishment. And this comes after 3 big wins in New York City last week. So, Moshe, we were watching a race for governor, Senate, and a key U.S. House seat. That's the Colorado 1st District in the Denver area, where we were watching whether longtime Democratic Representative Diana DeGette was able to hang on to her seat. She was up against a 29-year-old attorney and Democratic Socialist, Melat Kiros, who local media points out was born just months after DeGette won her seat in Congress about 30 years ago.
Yes, DeGette has been in Congress longer than Kiros has been alive. And just after midnight Eastern time, the call was made. Kiros won, taking down the longtime progressive Democrat DeGette in Kiros's first ever political race. Again, you mentioned she was 29. She's a lawyer turned barista. She's the latest Democratic Socialist to take down an incumbent, the 4th far-left candidate to win in just a week. Remember those races we told you about in New York City last week? The big question was, will this extend beyond New York? And so far, it appears the progressives, and in this case, Democratic Socialists, have some legs. Kiros now the 3rd far-left candidate to take down a sitting Democratic member of Congress in just a week here. Angling from the left, those 2 other Democrats went down again in New York City last week. Kiros rose to prominence a couple years ago in 2023 when she was fired from her law firm after writing an open letter criticizing her employer's response to pro-Palestinian protests. She stated in that open letter that she doesn't think that calling for the elimination of the country of Israel is anti-Semitic. She then lost her job and got some traction and then was eventually inspired to run for Congress here. She has refused to say whether the firebombing attack on Jews in Colorado last year that killed one elderly Jew, this was a small demonstration where they were calling for the freeing of hostages in Israel. Well, Kiros has refused to call that anti-Semitism, saying she can't get into the mind of the attacker and the larger issue was Israel. She's also on 9/11 said that U.S. foreign policy was to blame for the terror attacks on September 11th that killed thousands of Americans. I mentioned that DeGette was not a moderate. She was a progressive, a member of the Progressive Caucus, but she had been there for 3 decades, and Kiros had made the argument that she was not fighting hard enough and outflanked her from the left. Kiros had told media outlets that she had hoped to build on the wins in New York City last week and channel voters' anger with the political system. Now, Kiros was not the only far-left candidate to win last night in Colorado, over in the Colorado 8th Congressional District. This is a very competitive district, a very swing district that's currently represented by a Republican named Gabe Evans, who's seen as vulnerable. In the Democratic primary race, it was the progressive state representative, Manny Rittenell, who defeated a moderate Democrat to win the primary there. Rittenell is a Dominican-American former animal rights activist and lawyer with a significant social following. Rittenell appealed to voters in a district that is 40% Latino. Notably, the Republican that he's facing, Gabe Evans, is Latino as well. In his primary race, Rittenell defeated Shannon Byrd. She's a moderate who would argue that she had brought her appeal in the general election. Republicans in Colorado say they're excited. They believe they have a much better chance of beating Rittenell given how far left he is than they would have had Byrd in this battleground seat. They've been promoting pictures of Rittenell rallying alongside Zoran Mamdani. They've also highlighted Rittenell's criticism of meat and dairy consumption, and this is a very agricultural district. So we see the progressives winning in a couple of the primaries there on the congressional level. At the state level, there's a race for governor right now in Colorado, and that's where Senator Michael Bennet, a very well-known name in Colorado, once seen as a shoo-in, leading by double digits in the polls to be governor, he lost his primary last night to a challenger on his left. That is Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser. Weiser has been saying he'll be much more aggressive in attacking Trump. He was pointing to the lawsuits he filed as Attorney General and attacked Bennet for being too soft on Trump, despite the fact that Bennett's been very critical of Donald Trump. He did vote for several cabinet secretaries after Trump was inaugurated. Now, Bennett has said that he wanted a working relationship with some of those cabinet secretaries, and inevitably they had the votes because the Republican majority to be able to take office. Among the folks Bennett voted for was the Interior Secretary, Doug Burgum, the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, and Energy Secretary, Chris Wright. Though Bennett said, knowing what I know now, I would have never voted for him. Nonetheless, Bennett lost his bid to be the next governor of Colorado. Phil Weiser now in the driver's seat there. And one more race I'll tell you about in Colorado. This was an incumbent who did not lose to a progressive. In fact, he defeated his progressive competitor. That was incumbent Senator John Hickenlooper, a very well-known name also in Colorado. He fended off a primary challenge from progressive Colorado state lawmaker Julie Gonzalez. Now, Hickenlooper, 74 years old. He's just finishing up his first term in the U.S. Senate, but he did serve as 2 terms as governor of Colorado. Prior to that, he also spent about 8 years as mayor of Denver. So he's been around for a while. And among the things that he said in his campaign was that this was going to be the last time he's ever running for office. So for the most part, the progressives won last night in Colorado, and in particular, Kiros, the Democratic Socialist. But in the Hickenlooper race, he was able to overcome a challenger. Now, this opens up the inevitable discussion that we began to have last week about the future of the Democratic Party, the rise of these Democratic Socialists, of these progressives. Once they get to Congress, will they try to be practical, or will they just sort of needle the Democratic Party? The comparison being made to the Freedom Caucus on the right, the Republicans there, in many cases, just trying to vote against things as opposed to trying to cooperate and make deals over time. So time will tell, but next year, as the new Congress begins in January, it now looks like we'll have at least 3 Democratic Socialists taking office.